Hello, my name is Eliza. Though life has a way of changing everything in an instant, I never would have imagined recounting this story. I thought I had it all for years: a loving spouse, a happy family, and two gorgeous children. I was happy. The life we had created was never one I had questioned. That is, until I got home following a brief break, trying to rejuvenate following the death of my mother, only to discover that everything had collapsed. Losing my mother, the woman who had always been my rock, still painful. Her passing created a hole in my heart for which I had no idea how to close. I took a few days off to try to find some peace among the loss and to decompress. What I discovered broke all I knew, even though I had assumed I would go back home to the known comfort of my family. Our house had been wrecked by my husband Trent. Not even the decency to tell me about it. I was blinded. For years we had resided in the mansion. Though it was not a mansion or anything magnificent, it was ours, and packed many memories. For me, our children, Lucas and Sophie, had grown up there, embodied all aspect of our lives together. Trent, though, had concluded it was insufficient. The house was disarray when I first arrived. Everywhere was trash, half-painted walls, and missing furniture. Looking at the damage, my heart dropped, not knowing even where to start. Sitting there, Trent seemed totally unconcerned, as though nothing was wrong. "Trent," I murmured, my voice faltering with incredulity. "Where did our house disappear to? This is all—" He stared at me from a chilly, detached distance. "Eliza, it is time for a change. This location has historical significance. We want something more modern and something larger. Apart from that, your mother left you that inheritance. We could build a brand new house with that money, a true residence. One fit for our level of development." The earth seemed to have simply been taken out from under me. Trent's comments land like a slap in the face. Frozen, I stood there trying to sort out what he was saying. He more worried about modernizing our house than about honoring the memories we had here. Worse of all, he was rationalizing his behavior with the death of my mother. It seemed unbelievable. The man I married, Trent, the man I thought I knew, had changed entirely. Trent was ambitious, as I knew from past experience, but this was another thing entirely. Greed drove him, as did a compulsion to control all around him. Now, as if it were his right, he was attempting to claim control over my fortune. I got queasy in my gut. This has nothing to do with finding our family a new house. This was about his need for more power, more money, more of everything. Still going. "You owe me, Eliza. For years I have put up with everything. Your mom, the children, the house. I have seen you through all of it. You ought to feel glad. You ought to be thanking me for all I have done. This inheritance is going to correct everything. This is the only path out of this situation." I was boiling. "What do you mean, thank you?" I questioned, my voice getting higher. "For me, Trent, you did not do this. You acted for yourself, and now you are exploiting the death of my mother to excuse grabbing everything from me." Not even flinching was his reaction. "I'm only being pragmatic. We have to start over. One cannot live in the past indefinitely. I'm acting for all of us. What's best. You should be glad I am doing this." What he was saying hardly made sense to me. He was not paying attention to me. He was not sympathetically acknowledging my suffering. His own needs dominated him, and they had nothing to do with the family we had created. It was about respect of my mother, not about love or memories. It concerned his own ego, the money, and the power. Though I had always considered Trent and I as a team, this was much different. No longer was the man I married. He had developed someone I hardly knew at all, and I knew down deep that I could not simply watch him take everything from me. But just what could I do? He was the father of my children and my husband. How could I challenge him without breaking the life we had created apart? The questions and uncertainties whirled through my head. That evening, I slept little at all. What Trent had said, and how he had utterly ignored all we had created together, kept me wondering. It was not only the mansion. He was seeking everything. He had no interest in the life we had lived, or the children, or me. He was acting toward a goal utilizing me. I knew the next day I couldn't simply let this go. I had a task to complete. I refused to let Trent ruin what my family had worked for. I had to find a means of shielding my kids and me from his avarice. Though I was unsure how, I knew I had to move fast. I began looking at my choices. I was going to let Trent off with this. Though I was the same woman I was when we first met, he might have assumed he could control me. Over the years, I had become more resilient, and I was not going to let him ruin my life. I got in touch with Claire, a lawyer I knew with a stellar record for managing challenging divorce proceedings. Trent had always avoided Claire, and I knew she could assist me. It was time to retaliate. Though I was ready, the path ahead would be challenging. I was going to take back control of my life for my children, for my own peace of mind, and for the memories of my mother Trent was so eager to eradicate. Processing what had just happened between Trent and me as I sat there, memories of the past started to flood my head. It was the steady, sneaky change in Trent's behavior over the years that had brought me to doubt everything, not just the house or the fortune. I could not identify the man I had once loved, the man who had been my everything, anymore. Long gone was the man who had knocked me flat at 23. When Trent and I met at a mutual friend's party, I was captivated right away by his charm, confidence, and ability to make a room sparkle with just his smile. He was the kind of man who gave everything seeming simplicity. Everything felt to be falling into place when we got together. We were, so I believed, a wonderful match. He suggested not long after, and we were married that year. Even young, naive even, I thought of the fairy tale. We got married while I was still fresh out of college, and I had great aspirations of being a teacher. But those dreams began to vanish, as often occurs when the obligations of life mount up. Trent and I decided I would look after our expanding family from home. We were fortunate enough that Trent's job as an investment banker was flourishing, and I was spared working. About him, I valued his ambition and drive, but that ambition darkened something somewhere along the road. The earliest warning signals were faint. He started hanging out with clients and business associates and working longer hours. At first, I was not sure. I knew his career demanded sacrifices, but I began to feel as though I was only a side issue over time. Since the kids were tiny, I was the one running things at home. Trent's absence was emotional as much as physical. Spending time with the kids or me no longer piques his interest. His attention had switched. As though ascending the corporate ladder were the only thing that counted, he became fixated on it. I kept reminding myself it was only a phase. He would visit finally. Still, the distance between us widened with every year that passed. The last blow arrived with the death of my father. That day is very clear to me. My dad had been my rock, the one person I could always turn to. Losing him felt like losing a bit of me. I lost something and felt terrible. Trent, though, appeared not to give a damn. He became even more remote rather than being here for me. The last straw was his advice to me to concentrate on my mother and the children, as he had his own stuff to deal with. With the loss of my father, our marriage underwent a sea change. Trent immersed himself even more in his job, instead of the expected move forward, and showing me some sort of empathy. More than how I was feeling, he was worried about how his profession was performing, and about how the children were handling losing their grandfather. I felt totally alone, and had to look after everything on my own. I started to perceive the rifts in Trent's character, and in our relationship during this period. The most hurtful thing was me doing everything for our family, and him. I had given up my goals and my job to be the ideal wife and mother. I had given so much to enable us to be a family. Still, for him, it never seemed sufficient. Trent found nothing to be satisfactory. More, always more, was what he craved. He sought the ideal property, the most costly trips, the ideal way of life. Still, it was never about love, never about us. It concerned what we might learn, and our ability to wow others. I felt like I was losing myself more and more as he pushed for bigger and greater. Now, I was not Eliza. Being Trent's wife seemed to define me more than who I actually was. I stopped going for the things that used to bring me delight. My heart had lost all the tiny pleasures, the passions, the interests. All I did for him. Still, it was never enough no matter how much I offered. And then came the blow to finish all blows. Trent's boldness to seize my mother's inheritance as if it were his due. I could not believe my ears when he began discussing how to spend the money building a new house. It was more about the philosophy than about the house. He had little interest in the memories connected to that spot. He didn't give a damn about it being my house for years, where my kids had grown up, and where I had built my life. He wanted it right immediately, as well as the money. "You owe me, Eliza," he said. "I have done all for you." My blood ran cold. His status as the provider and his sacrifices gave him ownership over everything, he believed. He can see that I had given up just as much, if not more. I had given up my freedom, profession, and identity, that of a respectable wife and mother, and yet all he saw was a bank account, a tool for a goal in mind. That instant let me understand just how far he had gone. Trent was the man I had married no more. He was alien, someone I couldn't even identify. Once between us, the love had evolved into something poisonous, something manipulating, and it was about control, as much as money. Trent had always sought to rule those around him, but now he was trying to shape my life, decisions, and future. I have to stop this. I have to fight back for my kids as much as for me, for Lucas and Sophie, who expected more than this. It was time, I realized, to act, to stop letting Trent control our life. I had to advocate for my family and myself. I couldn't allow him to practically and symbolically destroy everything for his own self-serving benefit. At that point, I made the decision to engage in an activity I had never done before. I contacted Claire, a lawyer known for skill in managing challenging divorce proceedings. Trent had always dreaded Claire, and I knew she would be the one to enable me to regain control of things. It was time for me to stop waiting for Trent to change, to stop being passive. I stopped. I was eager to battle. There will be a difficult journey ahead. Still, that was the only road I had left, and I set myself on walking it. The days following my confrontation with Trent felt like an avalanche, everything moving so quickly, yet I was caught in this whirl of feelings and choices I cannot understand. The man I knew vanished, replaced by someone just concerned with his own needs. Still, something clicked inside of me. I could not simply watch him steamroll over my kids and me. I had to act, and I had to act fast. I initially spoke with Claire, the attorney. She was harsh, intelligent, and well known for precisely managing high-stakes divorce proceedings. Someone like her, someone who would counter Trent's manipulative, domineering tendencies, was what I needed. The first meeting with Claire seems to have happened yesterday. With my heart thumping, I sat across from her in a little, silent office, clutching my purse. I fretted. Though I had no idea what would happen, I knew one thing. I had to do this for Lucas and Sophie, as well as for myself. Claire's workplace was small but cozy, warm even, with legal bookshelves all around. She was cool-headed and collected, and looked at me with a clarity that made me feel as though she exactly knew what I was going through. She requested I clarify things for her. I gave her everything, about Trent's abrupt coldness, his obsession with money, the devastation of our house, and his obvious disrespect of my mother's legacy. Claire's expression grew tough as I said, "Eliza, this goes beyond a husband acting selfishly. Here is money deception and emotional assault. He doesn't give your children's or your well-being any thought. He is utilizing you. He just gives money top importance." Her comments come to me like a chilly slap. Though I knew Trent had changed, seeing it stated aloud from someone else made it real. I had overlooked the warning signals since I had been so engrossed in the whirlpool of our existence and so focused on trying to keep everything together. But right now, I was awake. I prepared to defend my future. We started compiling proof of Trent's activity. I began recording each interaction and every conversation. I followed his comments regarding money, the house, and the inheritance. Though it was taxing, it was absolutely vital. That was then followed by the strategy. Claire advised that we schedule a local cafe meeting for just the three of us with Trent. She wanted to record his statements and get on video the manipulation and threats I knew were about to occur. I was first dubious. Was I quite ready to face him once more? I knew, though, it had to happen. I couldn't allow what he had done go unpacked. My heart was in my throat that day the meeting was scheduled. I had no idea how Trent would respond or whether I could remain cool enough to manage it. I must, though. I was obliged to do this. For my kids, for me, and for the justice my mother so deserved. I started to get sick as Trent entered the cafe. There he was, the guy I had loved for so long, but today he was a stranger. Not even the kindliness or affection I was accustomed to greeted me. Rather, he sat down across from me, staring with those same cold, calculated eyes. "Are you prepared for our conversation? Try to keep your voice steady," I asked. Leaning back in his chair, he seemed not to want to glance directly at me. His gaze swept the room. He appeared virtually bored, as though he had no concern at all. But I understood that was merely behavior. Deep down, he felt afraid. I was no more the woman he could control. He knew the tables were turning. His voice flat, he said, "I think it's time we had this conversation. Eliza, I wish for that inheritance. In all its forms. It's time for you to take initiative and act for our family's best interests. The house you are hanging on to, it has nothing. It is collapsing. We ought to have something better." And should you neglect to assist me, you will come to regret it. I sensed bile building in my throat. How could he be so natural in saying these things? How could he be standing there demanding money from me as though I owed him something? I was not going to cave in, though. Not like this moment. You're not getting a dime from me, I stated with loud yet trembling voice. Trent, I have enough of your threats. You now have no influence on me. You seldom gave me or our family any thought. You only give money top importance. And then that pauses right now, his eyes blazing with wrath. He stared at me, but I did not flinch. Now I knew I was on top of things. Though he could cry and scream, he was not going to break me. He was not going to frighten me into obedience. You will regret this, he growled. You have no idea with whom you are dealing. I have tolerated you for years. Nothing without me would be you. I got up then, not allowing him to threaten me anymore. Without you, I nothing at all. I am all I need to be, Trent. I also do not need you. Not so much now. Not too long after that, the conference adjourned. I walked out of the cafe with a weird mix of resentment, relief, and resolve. I understood this was a starting point. Trent was hazardous. Hence, if I was going to outsmart him, I had to be wise, but I felt like I was in control. For the first time in a long time, I kept working with Claire back home, compiling all the available proof. We set ourselves for the worst. Though I knew Trent would not be going down without a struggle, I was ready. Whatever occurred, I was resolved to guard my kids, my legacy, and my mental clarity. I meant not to let him triumph. Not quite once more. I lost no time in deciding to act. I gave Claire, the attorney advised years ago, a call. She was strict, no nonsense, and known for pursuing anyone attempting to flee with injustice. And I was going to discover I needed someone precisely like her. The next day, Claire and I met at her office. I told her everything about Trent's greedy actions, deceptive behavior, and damage of our house. The rage and incredulity I had been holding within for days started to leak out as I talked. I became aware of the appalling treatment I had received for so long. The indicators had always been there, but I had either disregarded them or persuaded myself they were less severe than they appeared. The facts could not be disputed now. Leaning closer, Claire murmured, "You have a case, Eliza," her gaze sharp and deliberate, "and I will assist you in leaving this marriage. You should, however, be ready for what is ahead. Trent will not give up without struggle. He is used in dictating everything and everyone in his vicinity." I nodded. A flash of will. I was not going to let him control me going forward. This was about retrieving my life, not only about the house or the money. The next phase was compiling proof. Claire advised we have a chat with Trent to really capture his nature. Though my stomach turned over at the idea of facing him knowing I would be surreptitiously filming him, I knew it was essential. He had to be revealed. We arranged a rendezvous at a nearby cafe, hoping to capture Trent in his own words. As I watched for him to show up, there was obvious tension. Though I knew he was expecting a fight, I also knew this time I would not back down. Trent sat down across from me, and I could see his haughtiness in his eyes. He still felt he could talk his way out of anything, that he had control. I was poised to disprove him. "Trent," I responded, keeping my voice cool but forceful. "We should address the house and the inheritance." Leaning back in his chair, he crossed his arms. "We need that money, Eliza, I told you. Though I have been patient, it is now time to move. You owe me. I have backed this family as well as you. While you have stayed home with the children, I have worked. Your turn now is to contribute." Though I could feel my rage building inside me, I remained cool. I obliged. "I am not doing anything for Trent here. You have gone past a line. This is about you seizing all you can, not about helping the family. I refuse to let you take my inheritance as you intend to do." He slanted forward, his gaze narrowing. "You fail to understand, do you? You owe me. Everything I have done for you is owed by you. I have tolerated your mother, your children, and this shoddy house. Without me, you would not even have a life. Try not to make me remind you." My heart thumping in my chest, I said nothing. I understood this was the turning point, that evidence I needed. I could hear the malice in his remarks as he raged. About our family, about me, about anything but what he could grab from me. He showed no concern. "You have to pass that inheritance to Eliza," he said. "You will regret it as well. I'll see to it." His malice in voice made my spine shiver. Still, I persisted. I knew just what I had to do going forward. I gently got up, left the cafe, and sent the tape straight to Claire. We submitted for divorce the next week. Presenting the case, Claire did an amazing job highlighting the tape and offering proof of Trent's under control. The judge soon found out what kind of man Trent truly was. That courtroom let his actual nature be seen, and it looked terrible. I had an unusual sense of relief as the decision came down. I had won. The judge granted Lucas and Sophie, our children, full custody, as well as all of my mother's inheritance was to be retained by me. All that left Trent was his own conceit. Trent exploded as we walked out of the courtroom. Furious, he staggered back and forth, yells, "You've taken everything from me! Eliza, you'll regret this! As you will see, you cannot win." But I stood there, cool and steady, while he shouted. The guy I had married vanished, replaced with a resentful, angry individual believing he could control all around him. The truth had surfaced, and I was not going to let him dictate my life going forward. Claire turned to grin slightly at me. "You done it, Eliza. It ends now. You are not hurt anymore by him." I had a mixture of tiredness and emancipation at that same instant. For so long, I had been bearing weight. It had been lifted. Reclaiming my life, dignity, and future was more important than the house or the money. Trent was left to pay for his deeds. Nevertheless, while I remained free, his life started to run downhill. One after another, his investments collapsed. The community turned their back on him as the news of our divorce leaked onto the media. When the truth about his avarice and manipulation came out, nobody wanted to hang around him anymore. Weeks later, one evening, I noticed him seated by himself at a pub sipping a drink. His face was lean, his eyes hollow, and he exuded a guy who had lost all. It seemed unusual. I nearly had sympathy for him. But then my son Lucas mentioned the words I hadn't yet had the bravery to utter. His voice low. "Karma's a bitch, Mom," he whispered. "But he is deserving of it." Additionally, he was correct. From his own avarice, Trent had lost everything. He had been so preoccupied with consuming others that he failed to see he was gradually erasing himself. I had lost my anger. Neither did I find depressed. All I felt was relief at it ending. We were free. Looking back at everything now, I see how much will it take to turn away from a life that appeared ideal on the surface. The knowledge I have acquired has strengthened me, and at last, I am living the life I have always been due. Trent as well? He is essentially a warning story, though. He lost it, even though he had everything, as he could not find worth in anything except his own needs. Though for me, it marks a fresh start, and I am ready for whatever is ahead. The days before the divorce started seemed to pass in a haze. Every instant was a cautious step in a strategy I had been too afraid to follow prior, but now there was no turning back. I had decided. I knew I had enough proof to show the court Trent's actual character with Claire's cooperation. Nothing would stop me. Still, it wasn't simple. Every evening the anxiety bit me. I went back over our talks, our conflicts, and the way Trent had controlled me throughout the years. Still, I realized that confronting him head-on was the only way I could start to run my life once more. Relief and anxiety mixed together when I considered seeing him in court, at last making him answerable. But I knew it was where I belonged the moment I entered that courtroom. Claire was cool under pressure and had everything ready, everything to guarantee my case was perfect. She had before turned in proof of Trent's emotional manipulation and financial mistreatment. Every action he had done, from the forced pressure to spend my fortune on his ideas of a better life, to the obvious disrespect for my needs and emotions, was set out in front of the judge like an open book. I drew a long breath as we walked into the courtroom, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. It had escaped me until that point how much I had absorbed Trent's manipulation. Years of doubt about my own value and second-guessing my choices had left me standing in the truth now. Apologues and feigning were gone from here. He should be facing the results now. Trent arrived soon after me, his typical arrogant attitude absent. I could see the tightness around his eyes and the conflict in his posture. He was not going to find this simple, and for once, it made no difference. He had decided on this course. He had my hand pushed upon him. The hearing carried strong emotional resonance. Trent's attitude changed from arrogance to rage when Claire delivered the data. He had been seized. Every one of his deflections landed flat. There was no more manipulation of the story or creative justification. Unquestionably, the truth was what it was. My voice stayed steady when it was time for me to speak. Though I appeared cool under pressure, every word I spoke carried the weight of years of sacrifice and secret suffering. I talked about how Trent had gradually drifted apart from me, and how his fixation on money and prestige had turned our marriage into something alienable. I discussed his abandonment of me at the death of my father, leaving me to manage everything alone while he chased his own aspirations. I talked of the years I spent trying to satisfy him, trying to make everything work, but getting only indifference. It was exhilarating, cathartic even. Then I said the words I had been too terrified to voice for so long. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep living a lie for someone who only sees me as a stepping stone in his pursuit of wealth and power. I had always worried that I wasn't worthy of happiness outside of Trent's permission, that I wasn't adequate. But right now, I could at last see the reality. Trent reacted with explosive force. His cheeks flushed with wrath, he yelled as though he couldn't understand that I was no more the obedient wife he could influence. He screamed and railed about how I was destroying his life and taking everything from him. His scream was so severe that the court had to call for a break. Still, I felt a weird release. I was not the one being held accountable for the first time in years. Everybody in that courtroom saw Trent for who he really was when his mask fell off. Her decision when the judge got back was just what I had hoped for. I received full custody of our kids and was given the inheritance money. She discovered that Trent had been financially and emotionally abusive and that his behavior harmed the welfare of the family. Though it was a success, it did not seem like the kind of triumph I had envisioned. Though the years of damage cannot be reversed in one day, it was justice. I started to feel incredulity as I left the courtroom. I'd done it. I had recovered authority over my life. Once seeming to be so unclear, the future felt like a blank canvas, just ready to be created. I had freedom, but there was a cost associated with my triumph. Trent was rather enraged. He was not going to let me get away with it. He had been humbled in the one place he thought he had control, his own financial universe. But I had no more fear of him. I had no anxiety about his manipulation, wrath, or meaningless threats. Nothing he could do would make my life different. He was no more a part of it. The next several months presented difficulties. I had times when I questioned myself, and times when I wondered whether I had made the correct decision. But I knew I had done the right thing when I saw my kids, Lucas and Sophie, laughing and grinning. For myself as well as for them. Trent, on the other hand, spiraled downhill. His universe collapsed from once revolving on control and status. A succession of poor investments cost him his job. His entitlement and conceit had blinded him to the results of his behavior. Once the certain man he was, he turned to drink to dull the agony of his own self-destruction. And I recognized him for the empty shell he had evolved when the community turned its back on him and people stopped picking his calls and inviting him to events. Still, I felt no gratification in his collapse. What I sensed was clarity. My existence was apart from his now. No longer was my burden the house we had created together. The inheritance became useless for him in terms of controlling me. I could lastingly breathe. I was free. Watching him fall apart was difficult, but I couldn't allow myself slide into sympathy. He had chosen. Now he had to pay for it. Rebuilding my family, my life, and my peace of mind now was what counted, and I was more resolved than ever to make sure Trent, least of all, would never take that from me once more. Since the last court hearing a year ago, life had gradually but definitely begun to restore itself. Every day was a fresh chapter, and with each instant that passed, I felt myself becoming more at peace with the decisions I had taken, more confident, and more strong. At last I was free. I had reclaimed control over my life. The children and I had settled into our new house, a lovely place we had started from the ground up. Laughing, joy, and light permeated the walls. Here was a place where we could at last bid the past behind us and eagerly anticipate a better future. Though each item of the basic furniture revealed a tale of resiliency, of beginning afresh and rediscovering optimism once more. Too had Lucas and Sophie grown in this fresh surroundings. They were doing great in school, free from the continual stress and negativity that had hitherto dogged our life. Their laughter, their grins, their vitality, they were the best gift of all. It comprised all I had battled for, and I could declare with certainty that I was glad, first, in a very long time. After we had lastly unpacked the boxes, one afternoon, Sophie came to me clutching an envelope. It was thick, and the front's obvious calligraphy was Trevor. For a minute, my heart dropped, and dread crept in. Had he chosen at last to come up once more? Had he discovered some means to pull me back into his poisonous network? I inhaled deeply and opened the mail. It came out of a treatment facility. Trent had sent an apologetic letter noting all he had done wrong. He discussed how he had reached rock bottom, lost everything, and at last came to see the harm he had done, not only to me, but also to himself. The letter was loaded with apologies, promises to reform, and requests for pardon. Sophie stood next to me, reading my face as I worked through the letter. She said nothing at first, but I could tell she was thinking through what this meant for her father. She said softly, after a protracted quiet, "Do you suppose he actually means it?" I stared at her, my heart hurting for the girl who had already endured so much. "I'm not sure, darling. People change. They must want it, though. And even then, deeds say more than words. Still, what counts is that we are right here right now. We are safe and right here." Quietly playing in the corner, Lucas moved over to lay a hand on my shoulder. "You are strong, Mom. We are better off without him. You have imparted to us that." Feeling a warmth in my chest not seen in a long time, I grinned at them both. This represented my family. I had battled so hard for the future I could see. I had created something fresh, something better, even though I could not undo the past. I would keep guarding my kids from the anarchy Trent had brought into our life. I heard from the rehab center a couple more times as the months passed. Trent was progressing, or so they claimed, but that was no longer of interest to me. His trip was his own. Mine was to advance either with or without him. Everything I had gone through taught me something quite important. The strength to transform your life comes from inside, from what others expect or demand of you. That comes from within. Even if it's tough, it's the quiet decision to establish limits. Stand up for yourself. Walk away from things that no longer serve you. Laughing filled the air as I sat on the porch, watching Lucas and Sophie run about the yard. So realizing just how far I had come. I had weathered the storm, and now I was living in peace, savoring an almost limitless future. The past had no grip on me anymore. And one thing was very clear as I watched the sun drop on our new house. I was at last free. I was also really at peace for the first time in years.